Secondly, we're looking at the body. So when we have hundreds of people and we see that who have hypertension, and we see that 70% of them, when they balance their brain patterns, the hypertension doesn't show up anymore. Is that placebo? I don't care, right? On the one hand, I don't care, but on the other hand, I'm a hard scientist, and I measure everything. I'm a geek, for crying out loud. I can't help myself. That's what I do. That's what my life is. And by the way, the company I was working for before this one, what we did was we didn't do brain patterns. We did patterns of buying patterns. And so if you've seen Amazon, and if you've seen if you like this book, you'll also like these. That was our stuff. Those were algorithms, right? Those were patterns we picked up, and we created algorithms, and that's what we did, because I'm a pattern guy and I love brain patterns. And so what we're seeing now from our collection of data are brain patterns with a lot of people, and we're seeing how to change the body. And guess what? Those things combine all in the brain, where we see spiritual changes and where we see people now that are being connected to themselves and others in a much more profound way. That's about brain patterns. So we have about 3 million of these from about 32,000 people. This is a geek's heaven, okay? Heaven. I almost hate to go speak anymore because I hate to get away from the computer. I just love it so much. What we're finding are relationships between, for example, self-harm, right, and the brain pattern. So what does that mean? Well, that means, for example, in Japan, which has the highest suicide rate in the world, we now have 6 offices booked 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for 1 year. Why? Because that's the highest rate of depression and suicide in the world, and those offices are packed. Actually, there's 7 now as of last month, I think. So these patterns that we're finding are revealing to us how, in fact and indeed, life is manifesting through our own selves, our own limitless selves, by the way, through brain patterns. Here was one person, Mary. Mary's sister, we license our technology. Mary's sister came to us. She was actually Mary was from Seattle. Her sister was from California. She came to us as a licensee. She took the license home, and 2 weeks later, her sister was giving birth to twins. She had severe stroke. She went into a coma. They didn't catch it. They did brain surgery. Actually, they did surgery on both sides to stop the bleed. The coma deepened, and they asked the family to consider pulling the plug a number of times. So when Ann, her sister, called me and said, "Lee, what can I do?" I said, I don't know. I'm just a geek, for crying out loud. But here's what I do know. I know that if we can see brain patterns when we do an assessment on Mary, even if she was in a coma, if her brain pattern changes, we can pretty assured that she's still at home. And then you can make the decision, right, whether to pull the plug or not. So Ann got permission to hook her up, and they called Ann the crazy lady with the brain machine, is what they called her. I can't remember exactly what the words were that she called them, but I won't go into that. She hooked her sister up, and she found out that, she said, well, how do I do an assessment when the person can't answer me, can't respond? Because when we assess a brain pattern, we have the person first close their eyes, they're at rest, and then they open their eyes part way, and then they open their eyes all the way, and we ask them to perform a task. That way we can see what the brain does from point A, B, and C, right? Patterns. Oh, I love patterns, so that's what we do. And Ann did that, and she said, but how can I do that? She can't read and answer questions. She can't do simple arithmetic. Those are some of the questions for some of the points. She can't repeat back numbers to me, and I said, do it for her. So she would say, okay, Mary, I know you can't answer me right now, but I'm going to answer for you. Please repeat these numbers back to me. 178964. 178964. She just repeated them. Guess what Mary's brain pattern did? Bop. It moved like it would if, in fact, she was awake and repeating back those numbers. So what did that tell us? Well, that told us that she's at home, okay? She's capable. She's at home, and she is at home. Today, she's at home. She's taking care of her twins. She came out of the coma. We worked with her in a coma, and Ann did, and I just helped lead the way. But please understand that we don't do anything with that except we facilitate a way that the brain can balance itself. Unfortunately, it's not a pill approved by the FDA like Limitless, thank goodness, but it does tell us something about the brain. And it tells us that there are so many frontiers here that we know so little about, that this is in fact and indeed the most exciting field in today's world. So that was Mary, and she was a major influence for me. Margaret, and my mother too, by the way. Margaret didn't sleep well. She was losing memory at 91. She was a CEO of a major company in this country. It just frustrated the dickens out of her, as she told me. She had essential tremors so bad that she couldn't drink her cup of coffee in the morning, and it embarrassed her. And as a lady of some regard in the world, that really made her uneasy. And so we worked with her, and she appreciated the fact that she could drink her tea, but she also appreciated the fact now that she can work with us to help explore ways for people who are having problems, especially when they get older, cognitively and otherwise, as did my mom. My mom, as I said, is 101, and she was 93 when she called me and said she couldn't go on anymore. It's about our brain pattern. And when in fact it becomes imbalanced, it causes a difficulty. And it happens for children. And sometimes it happens for children, in fact and indeed, before the child is born. A biologist can look at the rings of a tree when it's cut down, and the biologist can measure that. That's a measurement. That's a hard science, folks. We can look at a brain pattern, hard science measurement, and we can see too when a trauma hits that person from early in their life to in the life stage, from early in the life to more recently. But for this child, for Alexis, she had a trauma in life. She didn't birth easily. Her mother was trying to do natural childbirth. They found later inappropriately that her head was too large. She was stuck. She was in labor for 30 hours, right? So you get the picture. And Alexis had a trauma pattern. But 3 of the top psychiatric hospitals in the world told those parents that, in fact, that they had to prepare for her being a dependent for the rest of her life. She would never be able to go beyond the bottom 25%, and that was even good. Alexis is now in the top 25% of her class 1 year later, and Alexis is now speaking in public almost better than I can speak. Well, anybody can speak better than I can speak in public, but she is better than I, and besides that, she has friends. Most importantly, when I got down on my knee and when she walked in that door, even though it was hard to keep track of her because her movement was all over all the time, when I got down on one knee and I looked her in the eye and I said, well, that's what your parents want for you from this brainwave optimization work. What do you want? And she said, I want to ride my bicycle. 2 weeks later, she was riding her bicycle, and today she's racing bicycles. So Alexis is one of those people. And then, of course, you and I have responsibility. Thank you for bringing forth that effort to send pens and paper to Afghanistan. Thank you for that. You and I have a responsibility for the men and women who serve us, and we do that. Most of these clients that come to us and to many affiliate offices who are vets are done so free of charge. We have about 600 now. And we are very successful with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, and have also worked with the Department of Defense Research Hospital in Charlottesville, Virginia on that. And it's incredible that those soldiers, be they female or male, and you would think that usually female would want to talk about it. No, I shouldn't. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes. I'm going to jump through a couple of things here real quick. But you would think, but nobody wants to talk about it, and they don't have to. They have to sit in a comfortable chair. We're dealing with their brain. We're going to resonate with it. And this is my time to show you what we do. So I'm going to add, would you help me 1 second? Would you just hold that for me? Right there. Okay, here's what we do. This is the brain, this is the computer. We're going to look at a range that's relatively optimal, and we're going to pick out in that optimal range a dominant frequency. So we're not going to try to encourage that brain to change to something that it isn't. We're going to simply play back something that it is. And we're going to help it to move that energy higher in that area that would be optimum performing. So it's going to work like this. I don't know if you could catch that. Can you? That's resonance. Thank you very much. Those are tuning forks. And what you just experienced or saw was resonance. When you hit one, the other one picked it up, right? It picked up the same energy, just like the computer will pick up the same energy from a brain pattern in an optimum performing range, and then it will play it back in sound to the person. And when that happens, that's all there is to it. Now you know what our intellectual property is, and you can go out and build it yourself. So what kicks it out? Trauma. I think mostly trauma. You know, don't get me wrong. I think difficulties are exceedingly important for us in life. And I think we should celebrate the difficulties that we have, actually. For instance, in my way of thinking, it's like a sailboat that has, about a third of it is in the keel under the water to hold the top 2/3, which is the sail, to empower it. So I think if we keep that in our life, about 2/3 of the time we're positive, and about 1/3 of the time we deal with crap, okay, we can do that, right? But we have to keep that ratio. That ratio is really important. So when we find ourselves moving down the path of complaint, then it's really, really important for us to find a way out of that. And so we can do that sometimes just simply by behavioral pattern, but in fact, most often, there's more than behavioral pattern. There's certainly more than behavioral pattern if there's a trauma print. And why is there a trauma print? Because when the bat hit me in the head, my brain responded to keep me alive. And that was a very important response for my brain to take. It did keep me alive. I'm here. However, it wasn't helpful for me after that. And so when I found that I was really quite imbalanced in certain areas, what that meant to me was when I brought those back, I lost, or at least the pathologies I was experiencing, the symptoms I was experiencing were mitigated. And so it is with 32,000 people, with these things and more, in about 150 offices around the country, but nobody right here. You're relatively close. And so those are the close, those are the people, those are the offices that are close that use us. So what are we doing? We're working on the Fond du Lac Reservation, substance abuse, Native Americans. Native American substance abuse program that's 4% effective in 3 months is pretty good. We're 58% effective in 1 year, and that's not good enough. What happened with that? We found out what a pattern looked like from basically what's generally thought of as fetal alcohol syndrome, but it's some kind of a fetal discomfort.